What's up with it, guys? Hey, welcome back to another video. Now, this is going to be the Demonology Warlock Legendary Breakdown. Alright, so we're going to go through the Legendaries here. And I get the questions about the Legendaries all the time. And I figured it'd be easiest just to make one video kind of going over it. Tell you guys what my plan is here going forward, which ones to upgrade, all that fun stuff. I'll put timestamps down below if there's a specific Legendary that you're interested or want to kind of know more about. But we've tested most of these. So let's just go ahead and we'll go through the list here. Now, keep in mind, I'm not going to be going over any of like the generic or like MA legendaries. This is going to be all Warlock and Demonology legendaries only. So Implosive Potential is the first one here. Now, I just made this one this last week as it's the one that won the poll that we did on the channel. And I've tested this out in a few Mythic Pluses, and I'm not super thrilled with it. The biggest thing that I didn't really understand the significance of prior to crafting this is that it really requires you to have at least 3 targets. If you read this, it says when this damages at least 3 targets, you instead gain 5% haste per imp. So it basically quintuples the value of this legendary if you hit 3 or more targets. This would seem like it's not too difficult or rare for that to occur. However, it's a lot more nuanced than you think, because there's plenty of times where certain ads are dying sooner and maybe half of the pull is only 2 ads or some situation. And I just found that this didn't have as much uptime as I thought I was going to have with it, as far as like having these like high 30, 40, 50% haste type scenarios. Now, I also could just be really bad at using it. And if you're a Mythic Plus player and that's your priority as far as content you're doing, this might be your go-to. But for me, because it has virtually 0 value in a raid situation, except for very specific situations, as far as like prolonged DPS, it has very little value, no value really at all in PvP. I don't really have that much value for this as far as my playstyle and the content that I do. If you're focused on Mythic Plus, this might be your go-to, but that's really the only place that this legendary excels. So again, raid, I would give it a thumbs down. PvP, I would give it a thumbs down. And Mythic Plus, I was like, I'm okay with it, but not super exciting. I was a little disappointed with Implosive Potential. Now, Grim Inquisitor's Dread Calling. This one was definitely more entertaining and more fun to play with than I was expecting at first glance. There's a lot of nuance to this. I can see the skill cap of this legendary actually being pretty high, considering that it doesn't have a time limit on the stacks. And if you get really familiar with certain dungeons or certain content and being able to basically preemptively stack this up to have these big AoE bursts was pretty satisfying. As far as overall DPS of this legendary, it's still a little bit lackluster. It would ideally be like 4 or 5% bonus damage, because it doesn't really compare in most settings, I don't think, from a like straight DPS perspective. But it's really fun to use. It's one of the few legendaries we have that kind of does change the playstyle a little bit and allows you to really take some pretty different talents than you might otherwise and have like a very different interaction between your legendary and your talents. And I really like how this legendary feels. In a raid environment, this is a small thumbs up because it does still give you some single target damage. It's not nearly on par with things like Wilfred or Horned Nightmare that we'll talk about here later, but it still does have single target value. And the thing that's great about this legendary, similar to Horned Nightmare, is that it does also give you AoE value if you are running Dreadlash. So if you like the Dreadstalker playstyle, I would recommend go ahead and playing with this. This isn't going to be the legendary that I level up, even though I really do like this legendary a lot. But anyway, we'll get into that. But this one was very good in Raid, very good in Mythic Plus, paired with Dreadlash. And it's also very fun in PvP and gives you very consistent, reliable DPS in a PvP setting. So all around, very, very strong. Now, third, we're going to talk about Forces of the Horned Nightmare. Now, I would argue that this is our best legendary just across the board. It doesn't top the meters or perform the highest in any one category, but it has great single target bonuses that it gives you. It has great AoE implications, very strong in PvP, very strong in PvE, and just very well rounded as a legendary in general. Because Hand of Gul'dan is used so consistently and imps have such a big implication, see what I did there, to our single target and our AoE because of Implosion. it's just all around very strong. In a lot of raid encounters, the Imp's Fireball will be, if not your first as far as damage done, it will be in your second. It's definitely in your top 2 or 3. So the Imp Fireball damage done over the course of a longer fight is very, very significant. And having, multiple free sets of 3 Imps over and over and over again throughout the raid encounter is very strong. While it might not change your gameplay that much or really be that impactful as far as how you feel like you're doing these bigger bursts or whatever, because it's kind of just a random proc, overall it's still very strong and just very consistent in every single category of content that you could be doing. This is, spoiler alert, this is going to be the legendary that I am going to upgrade first. It's not my first pick in any one category, but the thing that's great about this is I can upgrade this legendary and use it across the board and still be performing, pretty well. So this is going to be the first one I'm going to go to have as like a universal high eye level piece to be able to use in Mythic Plus, to be able to use in Raid, and be able to use in PvP. Like I said, it's not our top performer in any of those categories, but it's still very good. And if you like doing all of the content, this is what I would recommend. Or if you're even a newer player and don't want to have a legendary, significantly changing your gameplay, this is a legendary that's kind of like a set it and forget it. And you don't have to focus on it at all if you don't want to, as far as, recouping the value of this legendary when it procs. Now, next is Balespiders. This legendary was the one I was the most excited to try going into Shadowlands, and unfortunately it's pretty lackluster. Now, this has some promise because it is completely contingent on our Demon Bolt damage, right? It's all about the Demon Bolt damage. As we get into higher eye level and we get more and more intellect, there's a chance that this becomes more and more viable, especially when we start hitting higher haste caps with our gear and being able to maintain a higher amount of minions out and be able to run the sacrificed souls talent. There's a chance that this ends up kind of pulling ahead and being decent in the future. However, currently it's not performing particularly well in single target, has virtually no value in an AoE situation, and is a little bit too tough to maintain in a PvP situation as a 15-second buff. While it seems like it's kind of long, it's kind of hard to maintain that because of CC and potentially having to play defensively and people line of sighting you. There's all kinds of issues that can come up with this, so it's not reliable in a PvP situation either when you're talking about competitive arena gameplay. I do have my eye on this for the future, as I hope that this becomes a viable alternative to our playstyle, because if you run this setup and switch around some talents, it is a completely different raiding experience playing around this like Shadow Bolt, Demon Bolt build, as opposed to trying to do these big massive tyrants. It feels like night and day as far as what you're trying to prioritize with the spec. And so I hope this does have some viability and can compete with the tyrant setup, but currently it's just a little bit underwhelming and really only valuable in a raid environment. That being said, if you like this legendary, don't let me deter you from playing it. It's definitely an option. I just don't think it's optimal in really any content compared to some of our other alternatives that we have currently. Now, Wilfred's, this one ends up kind of being the sleeper strong legendary for Demo. This is right now in a raid environment performing the strongest, despite the fact that Demonology has the lowest cooldown reduction scaling with this of the other specs. It basically ends up shaving close to about 30 seconds off of your Tyrant, give or take. There's a couple downsides with this. One is it's contingent on you continually casting. So if you're in a Mythic Plus environment and you're trying to go in between pools and you're not spending shards during that time, you're not effectively using the value or gaining any value from this legendary. So it really does require a longer sustained situation to really gain value from this legendary. That same downside carries over to PvP, where there's a lot of times where you're not able just to free cast, and so it can be tough to really maximize the value of this legendary in PvP. That being said, there are higher players that run this legendary. However, I don't think it's our strongest choice when it comes to PvP at all, and can be a little bit hard to really kind of use. But in a raid environment, this seems to be pretty significantly the front runner when it comes to our overall single target DPS. This allows you to generally get 2 to 3 more tyrants off during these raid fights right now, which is pretty significant because our tyrant does so much damage. And there's just a lot of value in this in a longer sustained single target situation where you're able to really spend a lot of shards. This is going to be my go-to in the future when I'm able to craft multiple legendaries. I think as of right now, as it stands in the current tuning, this is going to be the go-to for our raid build, our raid setup, and the long single target sustained fights. This is just pulling ahead when it comes to DPS. In Mythic Plus, it also has some value. Like I said, you have a little more downtime in between packs, so you don't have as much value that you gain from this in Mythic Plus, but it does allow you where you could potentially be having Tyrant like every other trash pull in Mythic Plus, which is pretty cool. Not to mention, this is also a legendary that's going to give you a lot of value on tyrannical weeks in Mythic Plus when the bosses have larger health pools. PvP, like I said, it's just a little bit too unreliable. I would say you could probably plan on maybe shaving 10 seconds off your Tyrant cooldown in PvP situations, and it's just not a huge value add to me as far as a legendary goes in PvP. And the other thing is that in PvP, as you start getting into higher and higher ranks, people play away from your Tyrant more and more, and that's not really your kill contingency is not necessarily getting your Tyrant up. A lot of times it's just kind of your consistent damage and CC and pressure. So this just has not as much value as some other alternatives, in my opinion, when it comes to PvP. Now on to Claw of Endereth. This is something that I would argue really only has value in PvP, kind of the inverse of Wilfred's, making our Drain Life channel faster and restore 100% faster. This is basically just makes our Drain Life cast heal the same amount, but just happen quicker, right? This scales very good with things like Essence Drain, the PvP talent, as well as the Life Drain Conduit, and it's a very strong kind of tanky setup if you want to play that in PvP. There are some high-rated Demonology Warlocks playing with Claw of Endereth as their legendary, running that setup that I just mentioned, and it works. I mean, it's a very tanky play style. I eventually am going to test this out and play with it. However, I don't think it's going to be our strongest when it comes to PvP because we're already so tanky as a caster between Demon Armor and Soul Link and just the fact that we have Coil and Life Drain already as it is and, you know, Unending Resolve and all these things. We already have a lot of defensive capabilities as it is. And so I don't feel like I'm lacking defense as a Demonology Warlock when it comes to PvP settings. Most of the time I feel like my defense is adequate, and I don't feel like this would be make or break in me surviving a lot of situations, right? If I die, it's because I'm basically dying in a really quick burst opener with a rogue and a fire mage or something like that. So this does have some really good PvP implications. And if you want to go for that super tanky Demonology playstyle, this will be the pick for you. But it has virtually no value when you're talking about Mythic Plus or rating, with the exception of maybe some high, AoE damaging fights where you're having to life drain consistently to try and survive. But those don't really currently exist too much where I feel like I would take this over another legendary. But in PvP, it's very strong if you want that tanky playstyle. Now, Relic of Demonic Synergy. Unfortunately, I haven't crafted this yet, so I haven't really gotten to test it too much. And Demonology has the highest scaling, kind of the inverse of Wilfred's. We gain 15% increased damage on either our Felguard or ourself when this procs, as opposed to the other specs only having 10%. That being said, in a raid environment, like I'd mentioned earlier, the majority of our damage is from our Imps and our Tyrant, so we don't gain a ton of value from this because this doesn't buff either of those things. In a raid setting, right? Our demon bolts and things like that are great, but it's not a huge percentage of our damage by comparison. Same thing with our Felguard's damage. Arguably, maybe some fights you can make this work with demonic strength and kind of timing it and trying to buff up your Felguard as much as possible, but I think that's more of something that would give value in Mythic Plus type settings where you could potentially play around this and give you a little bit more added value in those kind of cleave situations. And I think the uptime on this, from what I've heard, is pretty high, but I haven't tested it yet. Like I said, I haven't been able to craft it. However, in PvP, this seems to be our best choice because if you look at the damage done in most PvP encounters, our Felguard is generally top of our damage done. Pairing this with things like Fel Commando, just very, very strong overall. This is a very, very good synergistic build with our Felguard. If what you're doing content-wise, you have a lot of damage being done from your Felguard out in maybe open world, world quest, things like that, this is also very good. However, it just really has no value to me in like a raid environment, and it's not that great in Mythic Plus. And since kind of arena or rated PvP and raids are my two kind of big points where I'm determining what I want to make, this is going to be later down the line. Now, my plan, big picture, is that I would like to have Relic of Demonic Synergy as my go-to for PvP situations. I do think that this is our best choice when it comes to PvP. And I would like to have Wilfred's as my raid legendary, ideally, right? In a perfect world, if we didn't have a weekly cap of Soul Ash, I would have those two legendaries for PvP and for raid. Mythic Plus, there's a little bit of kind of nuance there, and I'm still not totally sure what is going to be my favorite there. I'm not a big fan of Implosion for the reasons that I mentioned earlier. I think I would either be stuck here between Horn Nightmare or Dread Calling. And again, also, you could argue that Wilfred's might have some value in Mythic Plus too, with a certain play style going along with it, especially as we get into higher keys and the pulls are lasting long enough for your Tyrant to actually get its full damage out. That being said, my short-term plan here is going to be Forces of the Horned Nightmare. I am actually going to go ahead and level this up. I don't know if I'll go level it up all the way to 4, but at least to level 3. Because this is a very strong choice when it comes to PvP, has a lot of value in Mythic Plus, giving you bigger implosions, and it's very good and performs well in the raid. Not going to perform as good as Wilfred's, assuming you can get that Tyrant timing down packed, but this is a good all-around legendary, and I'm going to go ahead and just upgrade Forces of Horned Nightmare so I don't have a legendary piece that's my lowest eye level, because we're about to be on the cusp of getting to that point, and I need to make sure that we're getting the eye level up on something that I can use basically all the time. So I think Forces of Horned Nightmare is going to be my go-to for the immediate future. And then, like I said, as we get more and more Soul Ash, or we're able to unlock more and more, higher eye level legendaries later on, Demonic Synergy being great for PvP, Wilfred's being great for raid, and then you have a few options when it comes to Mythic Plus. And if you like that Implosion setup, that's probably also a super strong option in Mythic Plus. I just haven't been able to make it work for me, so sorry if that's a little anticlimactic and you're really hoping the Implosion legendary was something I was going to hype up. I'm just not super excited about it personally myself, but don't let that deter you. Hopefully this was helpful for you guys. This is a lot of talking, but I get this question a lot, and I felt like it was worth spending the time going through all of these in a video to better explain the strengths and the weaknesses of each one to help you guys make an informed decision of which ones you want to craft and or upgrade. So let me know if you have any questions down below or any aspects of any of these legendaries that I missed or overlooked. Leave them down below. Let's use this as a guide to kind of help people figure out what legendary they want to craft and make sure that we've kind of fleshed out all the different ideas and strengths and weaknesses of the given legendaries. Thanks so much for hanging out, guys. I appreciate it, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. See ya.